So this video is going to talk about speciation in Instantina, which is the salamander we've been talking about. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit more information about this and a little bit about speciation and natural selection to kind of help really drive this idea home. So the idea here is we've got all these different subspecies of this salamander, okay? And they look different. They're in different habitats. There's a lot of questions around: are there new species here, or are they just one species? Okay, so we've done the exercise and we kind of mapped out the zones that they lived in, right? And found that the Great Valley here, it's really, really dry, and salamanders don't necessarily go there. So it's a natural block, right? A geographical isolation in a sense that the ones over here and here rarely have a chance to reproduce, okay? And the first obvious thing, if you look down along the side here, is there are different colors, right? These tend to be a lot more orange, while the ones on this side tend to be a bit more blotchy and spotted, a little bit darker. You don't quite see the same ideas there, okay? You don't see the same types that you see over here, okay? This is a really great example of natural selection and the idea that different habitats have different environmental pressures. So over here, all of these salamanders have evolved and been selected to mimic a highly toxic newt, which is a newt is like a salamander but slightly different, but they look very, very similar. And they look similar enough that predators don't eat the salamanders because they look like the newt that is poisonous, okay? So that's an idea of mimicry, of copying something else that's toxic. So along this side, which is the same area where this newt's found, they've evolved to look like that newt. And natural selection have selected generations upon generations to look more like that newt. The other ones get eaten. They don't get to reproduce. On this side is kind of up in the Sierra Nevadas. There's woods, there's rocks, and this blotchy pattern is camouflage. So it helps prevent them from being seen, okay? So two very different environmental pressures acting here and two very different solutions to that, okay? So the question that becomes, are these different species, right? And remember, in order to have speciation, you need isolation, you need an allele frequency change, traits that are different, reproductive isolation, right? And if you can kind of match those things, then boom, we have a new species. So scientists have studied this. We did this in class to a certain extent, if you were here. And I'm going to add a few more bits here, okay? So looking at kind of up here, where there's lots of overlap between Picta and the Oregon version here of these two salamanders, 75% are hybrids. So they're a combination of these two, okay? So here it is, the hybrid here, right? And they reproduce just fine, okay? So up here, lots of intermixing. And if they're reproducing in the hybrids, the mixture between the two species, and you can see the contact zones all along here, they're making hybrids, everybody's happy, they're reproducing fine. So we're not getting isolation, we're not getting an allele frequency change, there's no reproductive isolation, so it's not a new species, okay? And again, as you kind of go down here, you see more alleles too. There's more variations in alleles. That suggests an older population, okay? There's been more time for mutations and things like that, okay? So that's interesting also. So in the sense that many of them up here if they are forming hybrids, it's no big deal. By kind of definition, these are all the same species, okay? However, as we move down into this area of Southern California, we have one particular one called Caluberi, the salamander, this subspecies, and lots of interesting things here, okay? At these contact zones, where there's overlap, only 5 to 7% are hybrids, okay? I think up here was 75%, down here was 5 to 7%, and they rarely reproduce, okay? So these are rarely reproducing. So this, in the case, we have some isolation, right? This Great Valley kind of separated these, so by the time, you know, the habitats have expanded back down to here, the subspecies here have changed so much to here that they're almost a new species now. And when the hybrids are produced, they're not reproducing. They rarely reproduce, so it's harder, right? So we have some isolation. We have an allele frequency change here. The traits are different. So yeah, I mean, these guys are looking different from these. You're getting a different set of traits there. Is there reproductive isolation? Yeah, looking here, it is very possible that there's reproductive isolation there. It seems likely. It's not full isolation yet, but partially. So are these a new species? Sort of, maybe, not 100% sure. They can rarely reproduce, so that's leaning more towards Caluberi being a new species. The genetics shows that these are quite separate from the genetics up here, so maybe. So what we've kind of got here is a snapshot of speciation, okay? We're taking a picture at this moment, and we found that that speciation is starting to occur, but it's not finished yet because of these, there's still some bits here. So this is an example of what we call a ring species, in a sense that this Great Valley kind of created a ring. So these organisms had to go either this way or this way. And over those hundreds of thousands of years, they were separated. By the time they got back together, they had evolved quite different paths and are less compatible. But they're not quite fully species now. So again, this is exactly ring species. If we came back in 1 million years, you may only have, say, Picta up here maybe, and maybe Caluberi, and a lot of these in-between ones may have gone extinct. So all we would see is this, and you can say, oh yeah, they're different species. But what we're seeing here is kind of speciation in action. We're seeing a snapshot of it. Quite luckily too, because we've got great variations here, right? And this is a really good example of evolution, of an example of how evolution can be very gradual, right? Slow changes over time. So I hope this kind of explains speciation a bit more. And again, these are the key ideas here, and I hope also that the western side and the eastern side here help show natural selection